Hello, everyone. Welcome again. Episode of Keep Kicking. Today I get to sit down and have a conversation with a new friend, and it goes really well. First bit of housekeeping is that I had my lobby set up wrong, and so this podcast was interrupted by another interview. I was able to isolate tracks and remove that, but there is a little bit of a clunkiness toward the end where I made two cuts while we were trying to talk to that other guest. So when the audio goes a little funky, that's why. Hopefully, I've figured out why I'm losing little bits of audio throughout the episodes. But we will see. So there's that. Also, Um, I enjoy this conversation because we talked a little bit more about technical aspects, um, the way that Mike teaches, and the way he delivers technique. And I enjoyed that. I actually personally learned a couple of small nuances on how I can deliver information as I'm teaching it. So that was a lovely, lovely, lovely thing. I hope you enjoy this conversation and find it as stimulating as I did. And thank you for watching. And keep kicking.
Keep kicking, never quitting. Focus sharp like a blade that's hitting. From white belt dreams to the master flow, Paul Coffey's got the mic, now the stories grow. Technique entails discipline and fire. Each guest brings truth to inspire. Keep kicking, step into your power. Keep kicking, moment to the hour. Every strike, every fall, every rise. It's a journey through a warrior's eyes. Old school, new school, all styles blend. From the mat to the mic, where the arts ascend. Philosophy deep, but the vibe stays tight. Martial minds meeting in the podcast light. Keep kicking, step into your power. Keep kicking, moment to the hour. Every strike, every fall, every rise. It's a journey through a warrior's eyes. Keep kicking. Keep kicking. Paul Coffey leads and the journey begins. Paul Coffey leads and the journey begins. Technique entails discipline and fire. Each guest brings truth to inspire. Keep kicking, step into your power. Keep kicking, moment to the hour. Every strike, every fall, every rise. It's a journey through a warrior's eyes. Keep kicking. Keep kicking. Paul Coffey leads and the journey begins. Paul Coffey leads and the journey begins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Keep Kicking, martial arts podcast, where I have martial conversations with my martial arts friends. And today I'm joined by Mike. Mike, go on and tell the people about yourself.
Um, I've been involved in martial arts since '78 and trained in a variety of disciplines, focused on Filipino and Indonesian arts since '95. Um, and that's probably good enough for now.
That's good enough for now. What got you started in martial arts?
I honestly don't remember. I was about six, and
Hmm.
I assume bullies had something to do with it. They were a routine problem for me in elementary school, and uh, but I don't really remember. To the best of my memory, I was interested from conception. Uh, but I have a vague memory of my uncle who got a VCR long before my parents did, bringing over Enter the Dragon. But I don't know if that was before or after I started training, or yeah. So I'm guessing Bullies, but I'm not sure.
Sounds great. What was the first style that you started in?
Taekwondo. Although talking to some folks who are far more versed in Korean arts than I am, um,
Mhm.
I think it was actually Tang Sudo, but my
Okay.
teacher called it Taekwondo because she came up in the late 50s and early 60s, and during that time, as I understand it, there was only one Korean martial art, and it was Taekwondo. And a lot of people who were doing
Mhm.
Hapkido or Hwarangdo or Kuksolan or whatever just continued teaching what they were teaching and relabeled it. So I suspect it was Tang Soo, but I learned it as Taekwondo.
That's probably just it's easier to call it a hamburger sort of
Right.
scenario.
Well, one of the instructors I trained with in the Indonesian pencak silat, when he and his brother started teaching it here in the States, in
Mhm.
the late 60s, early 70s. They just called it Indonesian Kung Fu because Kung Fu was the name
Okay.
at the time, right?
I like that actually. I like that a lot. Um, how long have you been teaching?
Um, on my own since 99. Um, I started a little earlier than that, helping my instructor, run classes and occasionally covering
Mhm.
for him in 97 and 98. But 99 was when I really started teaching on my own and running my own classes.
Wonderful. What has teaching done for your personal martial art application?
Everything. Um, you know, when I first started, when my instructor first started forcing me to teach, I hated it because I just wanted to train and learn.
Mhm.
But very shortly after starting to teach, I realized that it is the best way to learn.
Mhm.
You learn so much more from teaching than you do from training. Obviously, the training is important, and you have to reach a level where you can teach. But even pretty early on, I think it's important for more senior students to teach their younger students, even if it's one on one as they're working out, because you learn so much when you're trying to figure out how to explain something in a new a way that clicks, or you see something new, or your level of understanding just reaches a point where you go, oh, that's why my instructor's been telling me to do that for the past 10 years.
Right. I also enjoy that, like, as I teach a technique, I get to see it digested under different microscopes. So,
Yes.
like, I get to throw it to 20 different people and watch what 20 different perspectives do with the one thing. I love
Yes.
that about it. Yeah. Um, so what do you feel like the average student neglects in their own martial arts training?
I think that varies to some extent from student to student, but
Mhm.
I think the biggest thing overall is just basics. Um, Students, and I think we're all guilty of it. I know I certainly was, of wanting that next thing that, like, okay, I've got this basic thing, let's move on. Um, and I think that's a common thing that students try to rush to get to the advanced stuff. Um, I in my personal background, where the reality of that really clicked was when I was in my early 20s training Okinawan Goju-Ryu. And my instructor, a guy named Larry Davenport Sr., um, he always told us the basics are the most important thing. Everything is
Hmm.
built on top of them, and you can never overwork the basics. And I thought I knew what he meant. Um,
Hmm.
and then one night I was driving home from work. I worked second shift, so it was like 11 o'clock at night, something like that. And I happened to drive by the dojo, and the lights
Hmm.
were on. I thought, well, that's weird. And at
Hmm.
first I thought someone might have broken in, which would also be weird. But but
Right.
I couldn't think of another reason. So I
Hmm.
parked across the street and was trying to see what was going on through the windows. Big plate glass window, storefront dojo,
Hmm.
and Shion Davenport came out, and he was wearing, and this was the early '90s, so he was wearing one of
Okay.
those like literal sweatsuits from like the '70s or '80s, like nylon, like intended
Yeah,
to make
yeah, yeah.
right. And
Yeah. One
and
of the
so
windbreaker.
right. And he bowed onto the mat and he started and in my head I was like, "Oh, this is cool. I get to see what a seventh dan does in his private training, right?"
Right,
And
right.
he started running a form. And as he was running it, he would do a motion and then he would stop and check his posture, make these tiny little adjustments in it. And it took me three or four motions to realize he was running Gekisadaiichi, which is the first
Mm-hmm.
white belt form in the system. Something I thought I had already learned well at green belt, right? And
Right, right, right.
and, and I sat and watched him, and just it all sort of fell in place for me. Like, oh, when he says you can never overwork the basics, he literally means you can never overwork them. He's a seventh dan running this form and going here and then. Oh, I need to adjust,
Right.
and I couldn't even tell what he was adjusting a lot of times. Like, why
Right,
is he?
right.
So the basics are vital. One of the things, another thing Shion Davenport taught was that, and I assume still teaches, he's still active, um, is that if you have something, no matter how advanced it is, don't work on that if you need to improve it. Figure out what it's built on and work that, because that will
Mm,
include everything between, including that advanced thing.
right. Well, that's like the Bruce Lee quote. I fear not the man that knows 10,000 techniques, but the man that
Exactly.
practices one technique 10,000 times holds my respect. You
Yes.
know, um, what has martial arts done for your life outside of the dojo? How has it helped and improved?
So, a common question that I don't get so much anymore, but once upon a time I got pretty routinely was you've got your black belt, you've got multiple black belts, you've been teaching. Why do you continue doing it? Right? Because
Hmm.
people, especially outside of the martial arts, have an idea that, well, the black belt is the goal, right?
Right.
Um, and my answer to that is that literally everything in my life that I label positive can be attributed directly or indirectly to my martial arts. Everything, including my
Same,
wife, right?
same.
Uh, had had because when I met my wife, she was 38, I was 23, and
Okay.
had I been an average 23-year-old, she would not have given me a second glance because
Right.
of, because I've been trained in martial arts my whole life. I was more mature than the average 23-year-old. So she thought
And
I was,
confident.
yeah, and confident, and she thought I was in my early 30s. And
Hmm.
so that was enough to sort of get my foot in the door. So literally everything in my life that I label as positive, I can attribute one way or another to martial arts.
Wonderful. Wonderful. There's also like there's some sort of like thirst for knowledge that exists within martial arts. And I love hearing that while your path is long, it's also not been 40 something years in one style, like learning
Right.
the other styles. How did you get over to the Filipino styles?
So a guy who I call my brother, his name was Rick. We started
Hmm.
training together in Taekwondo in '78, and that's where we met.
Hmm.
And we remained friends with a few hiccups uh, over the years. And we continued. We trained together in karate. We trained together in a variety of other things when we were not officially training any one thing. We would get together with friends who were training in Kenpo or Aikido or whatever, and work out with them. And so he and I had were involved in martial arts from 6 years old until he died in 2013. And um, Rick was the way I explain it, he was a master of self deception. So, or self
Okay.
delusion, right? So,
Okay.
so anyone he was training with was the best thing since sliced bread, and anyone he had
Okay.
previously trained with was horrible, right? And did him wrong somehow, and and so in like '94, he had moved. We grew up in Central Indiana, and
Okay.
he had moved to Dayton, Ohio, to go to college. And he called me up and he's like, dude, you got to come see this guy. He's amazing. And I was like, of course he is. And at the time, I was training Okinawan Goju. And um, I went over to, I was like, fine, I'll check him out next time I visit. So, uh, and it was a guy named Ken Pinnell. And um, Rick, Rick was training privately with him. They lived in the same apartment complex. And the backstory on that is really amazing. But anyway, uh, so I watched the private, and I didn't want to interrupt or anything. It was a private lesson, but I watched a bit of
Hmm.
it. I was like, yeah, this guy's good. But they were doing Filipino stuff, which
Right.
didn't. It interested me, but not strongly. Certainly not enough for a 2.5 hour commute, right? And,
Right. Right.
and So, so that was December of '94. In February of '95, Ken opened a public school, and I went over to. I was visiting Rick, and he was going to class, so I went with him. And
Hmm.
in that class, Ken, because I was there, he sort of showed. It was like an info dump, right? This is the stuff that I do, right? And the Filipino stuff again, it interested me, but eh, it didn't draw me enough to be worth the 2.5 hour commute. But then the Pencak Silat, the Indonesian stuff, and that is a huge term. But what he showed that day was balance disruption, sweeps, and takedowns. And
Okay.
at the time, I'm 5'8", and at the time I was about 230 pounds. Ken is 5'8"
Hmm.
and 130 pounds, right?
Okay. Okay.
And he was tossing guys around who made me look petite, right? And
Okay.
and it wasn't that he did it effortlessly. I'd seen that from judo and aikido, right?
Right.
It
Right.
was that he did it contemptuously, like I don't have time for you to get the hell out of my way, and they would slam to the ground. And my thought was, this is bull. They are falling for him. And, and then he did it to me, and I went, okay, I don't know what that is, but I want it. So while I've been doing Filipino arts, Filipino and Indonesian for the past 30 years, it was the Pencak Silat, especially that expression of Pencak Silat, that really drew me in. That was worth the 2.5 hour commute. And so, so every weekend for a year, and like I said, I worked second shift. So I would get off work at 11:30, hop in the car and drive over to Dayton. And then I would get up in the morning and go train. And Ken had several classes on Saturday. So I would train for 4 or 5 hours on Saturday
Ooh.
and do a private each Sunday or once a month on Sunday to try and keep up with everyone else who was able to go multiple days a week. and
Right.
and then I would go home, go back to work, and just work the material on my own. And the day that I met Ken in Dayton, I
Hmm.
after that I went down to Cincinnati for a get together for an online gaming network. Bear in mind this was 1995, so we were killing robots
Okay.
every time we wanted to play, Pinochle or whatever, and and so at that event I met my now wife. And
Okay.
so the same day that I started training with Ken, I met my wife, and she also lived in Dayton, about a mile from Rick and Ken. So, so, so we started dating. After we reached a certain point, I would drive over and stay with her, and then go train, and then go back to work. After a year, I decided I've got in Indiana, I've got a trailer and a job, and in Ohio, I've got Ken and Margaret. So I
Hmm.
sold the trailer, moved in with Margaret, and got a new job. So, but yeah, that's what initially brought me to the Filipino and Indonesian stuff was my brother, finding it through a really weird circumstance, and introducing me to it.
Your brother and the girl, the two things
Yes,
that keep us going.
yes, exactly, exactly.
Wonderful. So you're still in Ohio?
No, we after Ohio, we lived in Ohio for about 6 years.
Hmm.
Then I moved to East Texas and trained with a guy named Joe Lansdale in his system called Shen Chuan. Um, and while I was training there, I was also teaching the Filipino and Indonesian stuff at his school. Then we lived in Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, for I don't know, 6 or 7 years. Then
I'm
Arizona
in
for
Louisville.
several years. Then we were full time RVers for 5 years and traveled all over. And I traveled all over teaching martial arts. Um, and then we were back in Kentucky for a bit, and then in Kissimmee, Florida for a year, and now we live in Cuenca, Ecuador.
Okay. Globetrotter. Globetrotter.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
and that's one of
Well,
the things. Go ahead.
I'm based out of Louisville, Kentucky,
Okay, right
and
on.
I greatly like and appreciate the 5 years RV time. Like that sings to me. And there was I can't remember the name of the master. There was a Bagua master who lived in Alaska. But what he would do is he would spend the summers in Alaska, and when summer was over, he would spend the rest of his time touring the states and teaching martial arts.
Yep,
And it
nice.
was it was him and his daughter. His wife had tragically died in childbirth, so he was just raising this girl, and the only thing that he knew was farming and bagua, and so she knew farming and bagua, you
Yeah,
know. But she was one of the most locked in students I'd ever seen in my entire life.
nice. Yeah.
So, do you have a school where you
Um,
currently are, or a
uh,
club, or a get
yeah,
together?
I have a handful of students here in Cuenca, and we
Hmm.
train at a park, and then uh,
Perfect.
yeah, well, so Cuenca is where the equator is like 2 degrees north of us, latitude wise,
Hmm.
and so the weather here is very consistent. And since we're at 8,500 feet elevation up in the Andes, um, we've got average lows in the 50s, average highs in the 70s every day. So occasionally it
Sounds
rains.
rough.
Yeah, exactly. Occasionally it rains on us while we're training, but every day is fine.
Sounds rough. Sounds so similar to the not moody and sporadic weather of Kentucky.
Right. And, yeah.
Oh.
So are you from Kentucky and Louisville?
Yes, yes.
So, are you, and I assume you're familiar with the martial arts scene there in general.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
I
are
love,
you,
we have such a deep, rich community of martial artists here.
yes.
It's a blessing.
Are you familiar with a school called Louisville Martial Arts?
Yes.
I taught there for several years. Um,
Oh, wonderful.
So yeah,
Okay.
when I first came on board with them, they were only doing Shaolin Kempo and Brazilian
Hmm.
Jiu-Jitsu.
Hmm.
And then one of the instructors, a guy named ah, Scott, I can't remember, Scott Smith,
Yep.
uh, who is now a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Pedro Sauer, but at the time he
Yeah.
was a brown belt. And he'd come at the time I was teaching in my garage, and he came and worked out with me there, and he's like, "Hey, you're doing good stuff. We're trying to diversify. Would you be interested?" So I went and taught there for several years, and then they changed locations, and they wound up with a Wing Chun instructor and
Hmm.
a couple and another class that I don't remember at the time, and then I moved away, and another Filipino instructor came in and started teaching. He's a great guy too. Um, so yeah, yeah, I was in Louisville for a bit. I had my own school on popular level for a couple of years. Um,
Where on Papa level?
uh, um, Whew, this is going back a bit. This was 20 years ago. So um,
Yeah.
let me see. What was right next to it? There was some. It was there was a it had been a strip club, and it was a large building, and it was
Uh-huh.
shut down. Right. I
Right.
rented parking spaces from the guy who owned that, so that my students could park somewhere. But it was a building next door, and the last time that I was by there, it was a tire repair place, um, and I think it was called Gordo's Tires. I want to say.
I can walk there from my parents' house.
Nice.
Yeah.
And yeah, we loved that building. Me and my students were
Hmm.
there like 40 hours a week, training,
Hmm.
working out, and um, it was a really nice location. So,
That's not too far from the first school that I started in was Okolona Martial Arts, which was
yep,
on Outer Loop,
yep.
probably 3 blocks from you, 4 blocks from you,
Yeah, yeah, not far.
something
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah,
so that's small world, Mike.
yeah, one of my senior students, he's the only instructor under me. He lives in where does he live now? Now he lives in southern Indiana, but
Hmm.
for decades he lived just south of Outer Loop. Um,
Oh, okay.
and he
Is he still in the martial arts community at all?
Yes and no. He is as active as he can be, but when COVID started, he was working security at a hospital. And so before
Mm.
there were vaccines, before like it wasn't long after they had figured out what it was, he contracted
Yeah.
it because he was escorting cadavers down
Mm.
the morgue and stuff, and it got into
Mhm.
his respiratory, his heart. So he has a pacemaker. He's had multiple heart bypasses, and so he still trains as much as he can,
Right.
but he only has like 10 minutes or so of energy before he's just done. So
That's rough.
yeah, and he was a lifelong martial artist. He has a seventh dan in a system of karate. I forget which one.
Mhm.
He's an instructor under me. He was an instructor under George Morin and Kuntao Silat Tatuars. Um, and like martial arts was, a huge facet of his life, and it just got
Right.
yanked out from under him. So
That's unfortunate. That is
yeah,
very unfortunate.
uh,
Um, maybe he'd be down for an interview. Maybe you can link me after.
I can definitely
So,
point in his direction.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Um, so the question that I asked has 2 parts. And part one was, what do all students neglect?
right.
The other aspect is, what is one technique or aspect of martial arts that you would like every martial arts student to know?
So uh, uh, I'm going to take a tangent here,
Hmm.
which is the thing I do
Absolutely.
in
Go
case
ahead.
you haven't noticed. Uh,
Hmm.
um, so along with martial arts, I'm a computer programmer, web developer, and writer. I write fiction and nonfiction. Um,
Very cool.
as such, stories are often what comes out of me. So, um, years and years, many years ago, I was teaching at a multi-instructor event in Ohio, or excuse me, in Illinois, in Chicago. And after the event, all the instructors, as you know, as is common, we were all having dinner together, hanging out, chatting. And someone asked, what we all believed was the most important thing to train in martial arts?"
Hmm.
And all of us, there were 8, 9 instructors there,
Hmm.
ranging in experience from 10 to 40 years, and
Right.
every single one of us, without hesitation, said balance, right? Because you might go,
Okay.
hopefully, you go your whole life without getting in a fight, but at some point you're going to fall, right?
For
And
sure.
being able to maintain your balance, being able to fall without injury, those are those are and what we all actually said was falling without injury, break falls,
Hmm.
whatever way we phrased it. But those are, I would say, the most vital thing for anyone to learn is the ability to fall and not take serious injury. Because that helps every, not every day, but it helps. I don't know. In
Hmm.
my life, it has helped a lot of times. Um, one time, me and some friends, we had just gone and seen a Jackie Chan movie, which made it even more funny. But we we were coming out of the theater, and I tripped stepping off the sidewalk, and I have a when I was a kid, I did gymnastics and tumbling. So
Hmm.
when I was like 4 and 5, but some of it stuck, and so I trip, fall, and I did a round off and bounced back up to my feet,
Hmm.
and people started clapping. They thought it was part of the promotion for the Jackie Chan movie. but but that ability, I here in Cuenca, uh, when it rains, especially, there are tiles throughout the city that are very, very slick. They become like ice rinks when it rains, and
Okay.
the sidewalks sometimes they'll like. There's a lot of places where cars go into a parking garage or into a home or whatever, and so
Hmm.
they'll
Hmm.
have you'll be walking along the sidewalk, and then there's a dip where the car
Hmm.
could go over. If you're not paying attention and it has rained, your foot hits that little dip and you go thump, right? And
Yep.
and everyone I know who lives here has had that happen at some point, usually multiple times. Um, and one of the times that happened to me, I went down, hit the concrete, hit the sidewalk, and there's a most of the community here, the expat community is retirees like 60, 70 plus, right? I'm young for that group, but nonetheless, there's a saying here that you can tell whether you're young or old by how people react when you fall. If they start laughing, you're young,
Ooh.
right? If they rush over and
Right.
go, "Oh my God, are you okay?" You're old.
Yeah. Right.
and and so people are like surrounding me, like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." And I was like, I didn't even have a scrape, an abrasion, right? The only thing that got
Wonderful.
bruised was my pride. and, but it was because of decades of training and knowing how to fall and not take serious injury. So yeah,
Right.
I think that is the most important skill anyone can learn in martial arts.
I could agree with that. And that also helps people as they age.
Hmm.
It's only a matter of time before somebody falls. Just, have you written any martial arts books?
Yes, two of them. Um,
Oh, yeah.
and I'm working on a third, although I don't know when it's going to get done. I started writing it like 10 years ago, and it's been on a back burner for 9 of those years. Um, but uh,
Where can people get your books?
Amazon, um,
Okay.
the
We'll
the
put a link in the.
right on. The primary one is called the A Pondering of Principles. Um,
Okay.
The second one is called the answering growl, and it is, while I'll be more than happy if people purchase it, it's more intended for people training with me. It goes
Okay.
a lot more into my specific history, what I teach, my thoughts on teaching, things like that. Pondering Your Principles is very generic as far as its content. Like the title implies, focuses on principles that are universal. Um, so it's yeah, I recommend that one to anyone. I know people who have made it recommended reading for their students, or at least their black belt level students.
Wonderful.
It's yeah.
Can you give us an example of your teaching attributes, your stuff specific to you?
Well, I'm not. I will answer that question as I understand it. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Yep.
I'm not sure I'll be answering exactly what you asked, but we can move in that direction.
Sure.
So my specialties are balance disruption and joint locks, and
Okay.
um, I especially balance. I love balance disruption, and I think tangential to that, like breakfall thing, I think it is not necessarily the most important thing, but since it affects our own understanding of our own balance, I think it
Hmm.
is more and more important as we get older to be able to have improve our balance and maintain our balance. But from a fighting or self defense perspective, if if I can take my opponent's balance even for that long,
Hmm.
during that time they are more worried about falling than they are about fighting me, right? So
Absolutely.
that can create openings for my own strikes, or for me to get away, or for me to get a weapon, or whatever the situation dictates. If I can disrupt his balance, that opens a window of opportunity for me. So one of my mottos is, from the moment I touch them to the moment I stop touching them, they should be in pain and off balance. So that balance to me is absolutely vital. Without balance, they can't generate solid power. Doesn't mean they can't hurt me, but they can't generate solid power. Um,
For sure.
they can flail and it might do damage, but it's a whole different thing between catching a flail and a actual shot, right?
Yes. Right. Right.
So balance is my prime, one of my huge focuses. Um, yeah, I from a very conceptual perspective, the way I view training in general is that you got striking as a hub, because
Hmm.
the only thing I can guarantee in a physical altercation is that I will have the opportunity to strike. Right? Um,
Absolutely.
Everything else, locks, throws, chokes, whatever, may or may not ever present themselves in a specific situation. But the
Right.
opportunity to strike will be there.
Hmm.
Whether I land any or not, that's a whole other ball of wax. But
Right.
uh, so so I see striking as the hub, right? And everything
Hmm.
else, joint locks, chokes, disarms, throws, all that has to come off of that hub. And then the balance disruption I consider the shortest stem from that hub, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
you got striking and then balance disruption, and sooner then sort of everything else are equal length spokes off of that.
Hmm.
Because balance, I even while I'm striking, I can disrupt balance, right? So it's often accessible even if nothing else is.
So I keep making notes. That's one of the things I do as people talk.
Yeah, no worries.
And this analogy that you have come up with, you inadvertently you made a wheel,
Yes,
you
absolutely.
know,
Yep,
and the hub is striking, and each spoke are different techniques to make a
exactly.
larger frame. But I wrote balance is the valve stem.
Nice. I like it. Yes.
You know, you said because it's not it's shorter and it's doing a little bit more. Um, so anyway, I like that. Um, how has martial arts helped with your, if it has it helped with your career, with your coding?
um, Not really.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it has with that.
Totally fine. Totally fair.
Yeah,
Well, the point of this podcast is to have discussion with martial artists so that we can promote all the different ways that martial arts helps people, but
right,
also so that we can talk philosophy, so that we can understand. I am of the fundamental opinion that there's a lot of ego that exists in martial arts, and that ego can be dissolved with simple discord. And what works for you might not work for me. You
totally,
mentioned your stature. I'm 6'5".
right,
So some of the things that work for you are not going to work for me. And some of
exactly.
the things that work for me are not going to work for you. And if we go to your wheel analogy, my hub of striking is probably a little larger than yours because I
Yep.
want to strike and I want to use my wingspan and keep people away from me,
Yes.
you
Yep.
know? Whereas I'm not going to try and disrupt their balance unless they get in and start scaring me and I can't keep them away, you know?
Right.
And like, I'm 6'5". I can keep you away with a kick.
Right.
Like,
Although I mentioned this in passing, balance can be
Mhm.
disrupted with striking.
Yes, a
Um,
hundred percent.
yeah,
Absolutely. You got to
and
pick the shot.
yeah. So I think if you focus on balance disruption as a core
Mhm.
tenet, then it improves everything else, no matter whether you're talking joint locks or striking or whatever. Because, for instance, like I said, joint locks are also are my other specialty. A lot of
Mhm.
people think of joint locks as pain and pain compliance, and
Mhm.
that is certainly a facet, right? But
Mhm.
I don't care, partially because I've worked as a bouncer. I have high pain tolerance myself. I don't really care about the pain. The pain is icing on
Mhm.
the cake to me. What I care about is that I've disrupted their structure and their balance, right?
Mhm.
So if I take a wrist lock and all I get is this, that's not very useful. If I get
Mhm.
this is useful, right?
Right. Right.
I don't care if it hurts them or not. They may be drunk, they may be high, they may have a high pain tolerance. That's all irrelevant. If it breaks their structure,
Mhm.
then I've got an advantage. Um, Tangentially striking. If I just hit someone, clock them in the jaw and they go woof, what else you got, right? Then
Right. Right.
A, that's kind of demoralizing, and and
Mhm.
and,
Absolutely.
and B, I didn't really accomplish anything. And it didn't open any windows for me, right? But
Mhm.
if I can hit them in, for instance, the solar plexus, A, I'm attacking their
Right.
their air, and B, if I drive it toward I use the term balance points, which
Mhm.
is something I got from Shen Chuan, the system I trained in Texas. Um,
Mhm.
and there are primary, secondary, and blended points. So if I drive that shot towards one of their points, generally it would be their
Mhm.
primary, it's going to more than likely disrupt their balance and take their air, right? So
Mhm.
if I want to finish a fight quickly, I focus on vision, air, and mobility. So vision has to go to the eyes. They're
Mhm.
highly vulnerable, but they're also generally well protected, right?
Mhm.
So my big two are air and mobility. Air, obvious targets, throat, solar plexus. But
Mhm.
anytime you cause pain, it affects their respiration. because their body
Absolutely.
heart rate to pump more endorphins and painkillers and blah blah blah. So pain and balance. Balance obviously attacks to mobility or knees and ankles, but if I
Hmm.
can get their balance, that affects their mobility. So in pain and off balance is constantly affect. If I can keep that going, I'm constantly affecting their respiration and their mobility.
I love that. Can you go a little bit more into the points of balance?
Yeah. So this is 1,000 times easier in person, but
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. It all
but
is.
and so the reason I use the terms primary and secondary, primary
Hmm.
are points that I have seen used in every single martial art that deals with balance disruption, whether it's judo,
Okay.
aikido, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, whatever. They all use these points. They don't usually isolate them and illustrate them as I present them, but they use them.
Hmm. Hmm.
Secondary points are things that are also common, but less common than the primary. So secondary points are common in like Aikido. Um,
Hmm.
and in my Silat background from Indonesia, we like close range. We want to keep people close. So
Hmm.
we generally don't do secondary because they tend to launch the person, right?
Okay, okay.
Sometimes I want to throw them off a cliff or into traffic, right? So
Right.
so those points are just as valid as anything else in the right situation. Um,
Hmm.
and the blended points are used a lot in Aikido. They talk about
Hmm.
blending routinely. Um,
Yep.
so so in this will be it's not difficult to imagine, but it can get tricky. So the primary points take your stance. Doesn't matter how you're standing or your opponent, whatever. Draw a line from the center of one of their feet to the center of the other foot, right? So you get a straight
Yep.
line.
Yep.
Now draw a triangle from that's equilateral, so equal sides,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
That third point, and you've got one in front and one behind, right?
Hmm.
Those are what I call the primary points. So
Okay.
if I, and some arts call it the third leg, some call it uh, an empty, whatever. If I
Hmm.
move part of their body toward that point, their balance is usually disrupted.
Hmm.
So, at a basic level of illustration, I have people just connect to their training partner's elbow, right?
Hmm.
Step past. So if I've got your if I connect to your right elbow and you've got a right lead,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
If I'm standing neutral or if you're standing neutral and your feet, you're just center and you're like in a horse stance type of structure. Well, that
Right.
point is directly behind your back. It's not very
Hmm.
accessible from the front. But as soon as
Right.
you give me a
Right.
lead, right? As soon as you give me a lead, now that point is more or less behind your elbow. So I
Right.
connect the elbow, step past with my right, just it's not necessary, but it's easy. And then
Hmm.
just direct your elbow toward that third point. And really, I tell people, act like you're reaching down to touch that point, right? So if I take your elbow and, like I said, I just tell people to reach toward that third point,
Hmm.
and it may or may not take them down, but it will almost always break their balance, right?
Absolutely.
So that's the primary point. There's another in front, right? So if
Hmm.
the next level that I take them to is they go toward that back point, the person steps back with their right leg to maintain their balance, right?
Hmm.
So then I can just switch and dump their elbow toward that front point, the point that's now in front of them, and that
Hmm.
disrupts their balance, right?
Wonderful.
With striking, if I drive into the solar plexus or the abdomen, even the chest, toward that back balance point, it will usually disrupt their balance. If I get to their head and drive their head toward that point, they fall down, right? Um, Secondary points, if you take that line between the feet and extend it out past their feet, about the same distance on either side.
Hmm.
That's your secondary point. So if, for instance, I take their elbow toward that, then that unbalances them, right? Like I said, the
Hmm.
secondary points in application tend to launch people. They tend to get thrown thrown away from me. The blended points are much more difficult to illustrate because um, a way to find them geometrically is that if you take one of my balance points, right? So I take my front primary point and your right secondary point, and I connect those
Hmm.
points with a line. The midpoint of that line is one of our blended points.
Okay.
They're very difficult to illustrate because as soon as one of us moves, especially if we move a foot, those points all shift, right? So, so the blended stuff there with the primary and secondary point. Primary are the primary and secondary are the most commonly achieved because they're only affected by that person's structure and position, right?
Yeah, yeah.
As soon as we get to blended, everything gets very dynamic, and um, so the only way to really pull those off is to train the hell out of them until as soon as you connect, you feel where that weakness is, that empty spot, and you're able to go to it, right? Um,
Hmm.
so most of my focus in teaching is on the primary and secondary. The blended is just something that has to develop over time.
That's very similar to a concept that I learned in Tai Chi, where your spine is a stack of dominoes, and so the
Yep.
goal then is to manipulate arms or manipulate extremities in a capacity that I take the stack of dominoes.
Yes.
You
Yep.
know,
Yeah. And
it's about that force of breaking the posture.
yes. So in Sichuan, one of the
Hmm.
locking methods, and it specializes in balance disruption and locking as well. Um,
Hmm.
one of the locking methods they call consecutive locking, and it's a more advanced
Hmm.
locking method. But from the wrist, for instance, you've got a wrist lock. You lock
Hmm.
the wrist, then the elbow, then the shoulder, then the spine,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And that locking sequence, it's more painful, but and you can take it
Okay.
beyond the spine. You can go from their right wrist to their left ankle, right? Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
which does really bizarre things to the body. But at the spine, they tend to drop, right? Because their holes they lock up, and then their balance is easily compromised, right?
For sure.
And it's that exact same principle of tilt, breaking the domino chain, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so yeah, that's another instructor I'm familiar with, Bob Torres. He does CLOT, and he uses triangles to express that. So in the Filipino arts, we use triangle footwork for a bunch of stuff, but he
Uh-huh.
takes triangles and puts them on the body. So a point here and a base here, right? Now invert that triangle, you've got a takedown, right? If
Okay.
you've got the point at the top of the hip and the base at the floor, invert that triangle, you've got a takedown, right? It's a
Hmm.
really simple methodology, and if you have any background, you go, well, yeah, of course, but it's very easy to teach.
Do you have any experience with Wing Chun?
A little bit, yeah, yeah.
Like
One of
the
my students
defensive and
is
offensive
a Wing Chun instructor, but yes,
the defensive and offensive triangles? Are you
uh,
familiar?
I'm going to say yes, but I don't have that specific term. Um,
Okay. Defensive triangle is formed elbows touching my rib cage
yep,
in this capacity, and then the offensive triangle is just extended arms.
yes,
Okay.
yep,
And so all defensive techniques in Wing Chun happen from here, happen real close and in. And then when I get on the attack, it's because I've created that distance.
right,
what's most interesting to me about what you're saying is that I teach everything geometrically. So
Right?
when I'm teaching footwork, we do diamonds, we do triangles, we do everything off of a point of interest in
Right.
that capacity. Then when we're doing striking, I don't want to teach a front punch because anatomically we will just extend. We won't narrow in. So I'm teaching on the line of a triangle, you know?
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
I like the idea of also creating multiple triangles or diamonds, geometric shapes
Yep.
on my opponent to attack and to disrupt into capacities. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we're about at time.
Excellent.
I want to ask you, do you have anything else that you would like to say to any student, whether it be day one or whether it be black belt, which I consider to be day one version 10,000, you
Right.
know?
I well, I'll tangent from that to
Mhm.
I look at black belt as a high school diploma. It's
Absolutely.
an accomplishment, but
Mhm.
it's not a high level accomplishment. It's not a doctorate. It's not a master's degree,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and as far as advice, I would say, and it's common. It's a pretty standard idea, but the black belt or beyond is just the guy who kept showing up, right? It's just the person who kept showing up. And so, I in my background with Seacall was the name of my primary system that I trained. And
Mhm.
when I started Seacall, I had no intention, no goal of black belt or instructor or anything. My objective was to learn something new, to get better, improve today over what I was yesterday. And
Absolutely.
that I would recommend as anyone's goal because by improving each day, whether it's that much or that much, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Then
Mhm.
my focus is improving every day. I will achieve that in most days. So it
Right.
feels good. And even if it's, oh, I figured out that I need to go to this angle instead of this angle, right? That's is perfectly fine. Uh, but it will get you there. After
Mhm.
when my instructor Ken in Sikal, one day he comes in, he said, "Mike, you and Bob are ready to test for instructorship," and I was floored. I had no idea that I was at that
Right.
level.
I didn't even know I was up for
Yes,
instructorship.
and I kind of think that I think that's a good way to approach it, right? Um,
For sure.
it's sort of like shooting a gun, right? If you
Mhm.
squeeze that, if you yank that trigger, you're going to miss. But if you just
Right.
apply steady pressure, incremental pressure, everything else
Mhm.
stays on target. Whatever your target is, in steady pressure is going to get you there.
Absolutely. I love it. You want to tell the people where they can find you
My
if
website
you want to
is
be found.
I mean, if you're in Ecuador, look me up. Uh,
Okay.
specifically
Okay.
Cuenca. Um, but online, I'm really easy to find. If you Google my name, the first like 4 pages are pretty much me.
Okay.
But my website is trainagps.com. AGPS is the name of my system. Um, and I'm on Facebook. I'm not on other socials much. I like Instagram and whatever. Uh,
Right.
uh, but uh, but yeah, I'm on Facebook. If you want to, you can find me there. And Amazon. If you look for my name, you'll find there is more than one Mike Casto, although it's rare. Um,
Okay.
uh, and and if you are searching my name, bear in mind there is no R in the last name. It's not Castro or Castor, it's Casto.
Okay.
And, but yeah, trainagps.com, Facebook, uh, Amazon for my books, both fiction and nonfiction. Feel free to buy any of them. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, that's
Okay. Love it. I'll get from you links and I'll make sure that I put them in the show notes for this episode. I want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me. And
my
as
pleasure.
such, also thank you for being a part of my martial arts journey.
My pleasure.
And everybody, keep kicking. And thank you all again for listening, for being a part of my journey. I want to thank Mike whenever he sees this for sitting down with me. I'd love to do it again sometime. And if you would like to be a part of this podcast, if you would like to come on and have a conversation with me and tell your story, you can email me at keepkickingpod@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on Facebook. I am readily available and want so desperately to have these conversations. They mean a lot to me. They are inspiring because I enjoy talking about the martial arts philosophy. Sometimes, like today, they've been educating, giving me nuanced approaches for teaching and even for my own practice. And then they're also enriching because I'm building community. I'm having conversations with people that I've never met before, and we're able to connect, even if we do have differences, on the similarities of martial arts. You should start a podcast. You should start recording that album. You should write that book. You should paint the painting. You should do that which fuels the fire inside of you. Until next time, my friends, keep kicking.